The 8-year-old boy stood in the snow outside the police station, tears frozen on his cheeks. "Sir, my mommy disappeared after her blind date. Please help me find her." George Adams, ex-detective turned single dad, wasn't a cop anymore, but something in the boy's desperate eyes made him stop. Something in his gut told him this was darker than a missed connection, and he was right. If you want to know how a disgraced detective saved a billionaire from her own family, hit that subscribe button. This story gets intense. George Adams was 38 years old and hadn't worn a badge in 3 years. Not since the night everything fell apart. Not since he'd pursued a suspect into an abandoned warehouse without backup and watched his partner, Mike Chen, take a bullet that should have been his. The memory still haunted George's dreams. The dark warehouse, the sound of their footsteps echoing off concrete. The suspect they'd been chasing for weeks, a drug dealer connected to 3 murders. George had spotted him entering the building and made a split-second decision. Go in now or lose him forever. He'd radioed for backup. Mike had argued they should wait, but George was sure they'd lose the suspect if they didn't move immediately. So he'd convinced Mike to follow him inside, just to observe, just to keep eyes on the target until the cavalry arrived. Except the suspect wasn't alone. He had 3 armed associates waiting in ambush. They'd been expecting cops. When George and Mike entered, the shooting started immediately. The bullet tore through Mike's shoulder, missing his heart by inches. George could still hear the sound Mike made when he went down, could still see the blood spreading across his partner's shirt, could still feel the pure terror of dragging Mike behind cover while bullets sparked off machinery around them. Backup arrived 2 minutes later, 2 minutes that felt like 2 hours. Mike survived, spent 6 months in physical therapy, learning to use his arm again, and never blamed George, not once. Not even when the doctors said he'd never have full range of motion. Not even when Mike's wife cried in the hospital waiting room and asked why they'd gone in without backup. But George blamed himself every single day, every single hour, every single moment he looked at his daughter and realized he'd almost orphaned her because of his arrogance. The department called it reckless. George called it the worst mistake of his life. The Internal Affairs investigation recommended a 3-month suspension without pay. George resigned before they could make it official. He couldn't face Mike, couldn't face the other detectives who trusted him to make smart decisions, couldn't face himself in the mirror wearing that badge he'd betrayed through stupid, impulsive heroics. So he took his 9-year-old daughter Lily and disappeared into a quiet life as a private security consultant. Nothing dangerous, nothing that required split-second decisions that could get people killed. Just boring corporate security assessments, background checks, and the occasional fraud investigation that never left an office. Lily had already lost her mother to cancer when she was 4. She had fuzzy memories of a woman with kind eyes who read her bedtime stories and sang off-key lullabies. Sometimes Lily would ask questions about Sarah. What was her favorite color? Did she like chocolate or vanilla? What did her laugh sound like? George kept photos everywhere so she wouldn't forget. On Lily's nightstand, in the hallway, on the refrigerator, Sarah Adams smiling on their wedding day, Sarah pregnant and glowing, Sarah holding newborn Lily with tears of joy streaming down her face. Sarah in the hospital during treatment, bald and thin, but still managing to smile for the camera because she didn't want Lily's last memories to be of her mother sad. The love of his life, taken too soon by a disease that didn't care about fairness or plans for the future. George had watched her fade over 18 brutal months, had held her hand through chemo treatments, had pretended to be strong when she was scared, had promised her he'd take care of their daughter, had kept that promise even when the grief threatened to swallow him whole. Sarah had died on a Tuesday morning in spring. Lily had been at preschool. George had been sitting beside the hospital bed holding Sarah's hand when her breathing changed, when the machines started beeping, when the nurses came rushing in, when everything stopped. He'd gone to pick up Lily from school an hour later, had knelt down on the playground and told his 4-year-old daughter that Mommy had gone to heaven, had held Lily while she cried and asked questions he didn't have answers for, had carried her to the car and driven home to a house that would never feel whole again. George wasn't going to let Lily lose him too, so he played it safe, went to her school plays and sat in the front row clapping louder than anyone, helped with homework every night at the kitchen table, made pancakes on Saturdays that were always slightly burned on the edges, but she ate anyway because they were their tradition. Built a small, quiet life that didn't involve bullets or blood or the kind of adrenaline that made you do stupid things that got people killed. But on that snowy December evening, standing outside the precinct where he used to work, watching an 8-year-old boy with dark hair and tear-stained cheeks desperately approach strangers for help, George felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. The pull, the instinct, the absolute certainty that something was very, very wrong. George had just picked Lily up from a Christmas party at the community centre next door to the police station. She was in the car, buckled in the back seat, humming along to holiday music on the radio, safe, happy, oblivious to the crying child outside. But George saw him, and once he saw him, he couldn't look away. The boy was well dressed, expensive winter coat with a designer logo, good boots that probably cost more than George's monthly car payment, but his eyes held the kind of fear that transcended social class. Pure, undiluted terror that only came when you truly believed you'd lost someone you loved. George watched as the boy approached a uniformed officer leaving the station, watched the officer shake his head, pat the kid's shoulder, and walk away, watched the boy's face crumble before he wiped his eyes and approached someone else. George should have driven away, should have focused on his own daughter, his own quiet life, his own promise to stay out of dangerous situations. But he didn't. He rolled down the window. "Lily, honey, I need you to stay in the car for a minute, okay? Keep the doors locked. I'll be right back." "Is everything okay, Dad?" "Yes, sweetheart. I just need to talk to someone." George stepped out into the snow, his breath visible in the freezing air. The boy was approaching another stranger, a woman in a business suit who checked her phone and kept walking without even acknowledging him. "Hey!" George called out. "Kid, over here!" The boy turned. Up close, George could see he'd been crying for a while. His cheeks were raw and red. His nose was running. He looked exhausted and desperate and completely alone. "Sir," the boy said, his voice breaking on the word, "my mommy went on a blind date yesterday, and she didn't come home. She always comes home. She promised she'd always come home. But it's been a whole day and nobody knows where she is, and the police won't help because they say adults are allowed to disappear for 48 hours. But what if something bad happens during those 48 hours? What if she needs help right now?" The words tumbled out in a rush, like they'd been building up for hours. George knelt down in the snow, bringing himself eye level with the kid. "Slow down. Take a breath. What's your name?" "Marcus Wilson." The boy wiped his nose with his sleeve. "And my mom is Vivian Wilson. She owns Wilson Enterprises. It's a really big company. Everyone knows who she is, but nobody will help me find her." Wilson Enterprises. George knew the name. Everyone in the city did. Tech conglomerate, billions in revenue, headquarters in the financial district. Founded by Vivian Wilson after her parents died in a car accident and left her a failing manufacturing company she'd transformed into a Silicon Valley giant. George had seen her face on magazine covers. Young CEO, Forbes 30 under 30, Business Insider's most influential woman in tech, and apparently a single mom who went on blind dates and didn't come home. How old are you, Marcus? 8. I'll be 9 in February. And you're here alone? Marcus shook his head. Mr. Bradford is supposed to be watching me. He's my bodyguard. But he fell asleep on the couch and I snuck out because nobody believes me that something's wrong. They all keep saying Mom probably just wanted a break, or maybe the date went really well and she stayed over somewhere, but she wouldn't do that without telling me. She always tells me everything. Always. A bodyguard, a CEO mother, a blind date that went wrong. George's detective instincts, dormant for 3 years, suddenly roared to life. This wasn't a woman taking an impromptu vacation. This was something else entirely. Marcus, where do you live? The Grandview Towers. Penthouse. It's on... I know where it is. George pulled out his phone. I'm going to help you. But first, we need to get you back home before your bodyguard wakes up and realizes you're gone. Then you're going to tell me everything you know about your mum's blind date. Every single detail. Can you do that? Marcus nodded so hard his whole body shook. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Everyone else just kept walking away, but you stopped. You actually stopped. Yeah. Well, I've got a daughter about your age. If something happened to me, I'd want someone to help her. George stood up. Come on, my car's right over here. George walked Marcus to his sedan. Lily's eyes widened when she saw the crying boy. Dad? Who's that? This is Marcus. His mom is missing and I'm going to help him find her. Marcus, this is my daughter Lily. Marcus climbed into the back seat, suddenly shy. Lily, never one for awkward silences, immediately handed him a tissue from the box George kept in the car. Here, you look like you've been crying a lot. Thanks. Marcus took it gratefully. I'm really scared. My dad's really good at finding people. He used to be a detective. He'll find your mum. George caught Lily's eyes in the rearview mirror. She was giving him that look. The one that said she knew he was about to do something dangerous, and she was worried, but also proud. Too perceptive for a 9-year-old. Lily's right, George said, starting the car. I'll find your mom. That's a promise. The drive to Grandview Towers took 15 minutes through snow-covered streets decorated with Christmas lights. George used the time to ask Marcus questions, slipping back into detective mode without even realizing it. When had Vivian left? What had she been wearing? Who had set up the blind date? Did she seem nervous or excited? What time was she supposed to be home? Did she have any enemies? Any recent threats or strange interactions? Marcus answered everything, his voice getting steadier as he focused on facts instead of fear. The act of being useful, of helping find his mother, seemed to calm him down. Lily handed him tissues when his voice cracked and offered encouraging nods when he remembered new details. Vivian had left at 6:30 p.m. the previous evening. She'd spent an hour getting ready, which was unusual because she normally threw on whatever was clean and called it good. But she'd actually styled her hair, put on makeup, chosen her outfit carefully, a dark blue dress that Marcus said was her favorite, the one she wore to important board presentations, and her favorite earrings, the pearl ones her mother had given her before the car accident. Her assistant, Lisa Chen, had set up the date through some professional networking app for executives, something called Elite Connections, that supposedly vetted members to ensure they were legitimate high-level professionals. The man was supposedly a business consultant from Seattle named Richard Morrison, age 39, Stanford MBA, impressive client list. Lisa had shown Vivian his profile 3 weeks ago, and Vivian had been reluctant at first, but eventually agreed to meet him. Vivian had been cautiously optimistic when she left, nervous but hopeful. She'd kissed Marcus goodbye and promised she'd be home by 10 at the latest. She'd told him Mr. Bradford would make him dinner and supervise homework, and that she'd check his math problems when she got back. Normal mom stuff. The kind of details you didn't bother with if you were planning to disappear. She hadn't dated much since Marcus's father left when Marcus was 2. Marcus explained this matter-of-factly, like he'd explained it to himself many times before. "What happened to your dad?" George asked gently, careful not to push too hard. Marcus stared out the window at the passing Christmas decorations. "He didn't want to be a dad. Mom got pregnant, and he said he wasn't ready for that kind of commitment. He wanted her to choose between him and me. She chose me." The boy's voice was steady, but George heard the hurt underneath. "Mum says some people aren't ready for that kind of responsibility. She says it's okay because we have each other, and that's enough. She says we're a team." George's heart twisted. He knew that tone. The brave front kids put up when they'd been abandoned by someone who was supposed to love them. The rehearsed explanation that tried to make sense of the inexplicable. "Your mom sounds like a smart woman, and brave." "She is. She's the smartest person I know. She built a whole company from nothing after my grandparents died, and she's nice too. Not like how people think CEOs are. They think she's probably cold and mean and only cares about money. But she reads to me every single night before bed, even when she has conference calls with China at midnight. Makes me breakfast every morning and asks me about my dreams. Even when she has really important meetings, she always comes to my school stuff. Every concert, every science fair, every parent-teacher conference." Marcus's voice cracked. "That's how I know something's wrong. She would never just not come home. Never. She promised she'd always come home to me. Always." Grandview Towers was exactly as expensive as George expected. Marble lobby, doorman in a uniform, the kind of place where George's beat-up sedan got suspicious looks from the valet. But Marcus knew everyone. He waved at the doorman, "Hi, Frank," and led George and Lily straight to the private elevator that went to the penthouse. The elevator required a keycard. Marcus pulled one from his pocket. "Mum gave me this for emergencies. She said I should always be able to get home." The elevator opened directly into the penthouse, and it was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city skyline. Minimalist furniture that was somehow both expensive and comfortable. Art on the walls that George recognized from museum catalogues. A Christmas tree in the corner decorated with handmade ornaments that looked like a child had made them. The disconnect between the corporate luxury and the personal touches made George's chest tight. This wasn't just a CEO's showcase. This was a home. A place where Vivian Wilson raised her son and tried to give him a normal life despite the billions. "Mr. Wilson." A man stumbled into the living room, his eyes wild with panic. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a security earpiece. The bodyguard. "I thought you were in bed. I only closed my eyes for a minute." "It's fine, Bradford." George stepped forward, pulling out the private investigator credentials he technically still had, even though he barely used them. "George Adams, I'm a security consultant. Marcus came to find me because he's worried about his mother. Why don't you tell me about Ms. Wilson's schedule yesterday?" Bradford looked between George and Marcus, clearly calculating whether he was about to lose his job. His face was pale, sweating despite the cool temperature. George had seen that look before, the look of someone who knew they'd screwed up bad and was trying to figure out how to minimize damage. "Ms. Wilson had a blind date yesterday evening," Bradford said finally. 7 p.m. at Marcello's, the Italian restaurant downtown. She was set up by her assistant, Lisa Chen. The man was supposedly a business consultant from Seattle, Richard Morrison. LinkedIn profile, references, everything checked out. Lisa vetted him thoroughly. "Did you?" "Did I what?" "Vet him, independently." Bradford hesitated. "I reviewed the profile Lisa sent me. It looked legitimate." "But you didn't do your own background check." No. Ms. Wilson trusts Lisa completely. I didn't think—" "That's the problem." George kept his voice level, but his mind was racing. A CEO with that kind of wealth should have had multiple layers of security vetting. The fact that they'd relied on an assistant's judgment was a massive vulnerability. What happened after she left for the date? She texted me at 7:15 saying the date was going fine, that Morrison seemed nice, then nothing. Nothing? Her phone went dark at 7:43. I pinged it using the security protocol she has me run every night. Last location was 3 blocks from the restaurant, in an alley behind the Grandview Hotel. Bradford's voice dropped. Then the phone went completely offline, no signal, like it had been destroyed or turned off. George's blood ran cold. An alley. Phone going dark. This was bad. Really bad. And you didn't report this to the police? I tried. I called the precinct. They said adults are allowed to go off-grid for 48 hours. They said maybe she was with Morrison and wanted privacy. They said, to wait, I know. George pulled out his own phone. Do you have the contact information for this blind date? Name, number, anything? Bradford pulled up his tablet, his hands shaking slightly. Richard Morrison, Seattle-based business consultant, age 39, Stanford MBA, worked for McKinsey, then went independent 5 years ago. Clients include several Fortune 500 companies. He showed George the LinkedIn profile. George studied it. Professional headshot. Generic but handsome. Well-written bio. Recommendations from people with verifiable profiles. On the surface, it looked legitimate. But George had spent 15 years as a detective. He knew how to build a fake identity that would pass casual scrutiny. This is fake, he said flatly. Bradford's face went white. What? But Lisa checked what he wanted her to see. Look at the profile activity. No personal posts. No photos from events or conferences. No casual interactions. This is a professional facade, not a real person. Someone built this identity specifically to get close to your boss. But why would... Bradford stopped. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Oh God. This was planned. This wasn't a random date. This was a setup. Yeah. George's mind was already 3 steps ahead, running scenarios. Does Ms. Wilson have any enemies? Business rivals? Anyone who'd want to hurt her or her company? Marcus spoke up from where he and Lily had been watching nervously. Uncle Richard is always fighting with Mom about the company, and Mr. Harrison, one of the partners. But Uncle Richard would never hurt Mom, their family. Uncle Richard? George filed that away. What do they fight about? Selling the company. Uncle Richard wants Mom to sell Wilson Enterprises to some big conglomerate. He says they'll make billions and can retire. But Mom doesn't want to. She says Wilson Enterprises is her legacy, for me, for our future. George looked at Bradford. Tell me about Richard Wilson. Vivian's younger brother, age 35, COO of Wilson Enterprises. He inherited equal shares when their parents died, but Vivian runs the company. There's been tension for the past year about strategic direction. Richard wants to sell. Vivian refuses. And Harrison? Robert Harrison, senior partner, age 42. He and Richard have been pushing the sale hard. Board meetings have gotten heated. George felt pieces clicking into place. A fake blind date. A CEO who wouldn't sell. A brother who wanted out. And a woman missing in an alley behind a hotel. This wasn't a random crime. This was an orchestrated abduction. And the clock was ticking. Bradford, I need you to do something for me. George's voice had shifted. No longer friendly. Now it was the voice of someone who'd commanded crime scenes and interrogations. I need security footage from every camera within 3 blocks of that alley. I need Ms. Wilson's computer, her personal one, and I need the contact information for Lisa Chen. I can't just give you access to your boss is missing. Her phone went dark in an alley 24 hours ago. Every hour that passes makes it less likely we find her alive. George stepped closer. Now you can either help me, or you can explain to Marcus why you prioritized protocol over his mother's life. Bradford looked at Marcus. The 8-year-old was trying so hard to be brave, but his lip was trembling. Bradford's expression crumbled. Her office is this way. Vivian Wilson's home office was as impressive as the rest of the penthouse. Wall of monitors, executive desk with ergonomic chair, filing cabinets that probably contained millions in trade secrets. And in the corner, a small reading nook with children's books and a beanbag chair where Marcus probably sat while his mother worked. George sat down at her computer. Password protected, of course. He pulled out a bypass drive he really wasn't supposed to have anymore, a gift from his tech-savvy partner Mike before everything went wrong. The drive was technically illegal. George didn't care. "What are you doing?" Bradford asked nervously. Finding out who wanted Vivian Wilson gone. The bypass worked. George was in. He started with emails. Most were corporate, board minutes, financial reports, client communications. But then he found a folder marked Confidential, Harrison. George opened it, and there, spanning the last 6 months, was a paper trail of threats and accusations. The emails started professionally. Harrison questioning Vivian's financial decisions, suggesting she was taking unnecessary risks, recommending the sale to the conglomerate as a safer bet. Vivian's responses were measured but firm, explaining her strategy, defending her choices. But the emails escalated. Harrison's tone became more aggressive. He accused Vivian of incompetence, of ego, of risking shareholder value for personal glory, and Vivian's responses became sharper, until finally, 3 weeks ago, everything changed. An email from Vivian to Harrison. "I know what you've been doing. I have proof. Either you resign quietly, or I'm going to the FBI. Harrison's response. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. Walk away while you can." Vivian's final email, dated 1 week ago. "I've compiled all the evidence, wire transfers, offshore accounts, shell companies. I'm meeting with federal investigators on Monday. It's over, Robert." George's hands were shaking as he read. "Bradford, what's today?" "Thursday." "And when was this meeting scheduled?" "Monday was 3 days ago." Bradford leaned over George's shoulder, reading. His face went ashen. Oh my God, she was embezzled. Harrison was stealing from the company. Not just Harrison. George opened the wire transfer files Vivian had compiled. "Look at the authorization signatures. These required 2 executives, Harrison and Richard Wilson." Bradford's voice was barely a whisper. Vivian's brother. Marcus made a small sound. George turned to see the boy's face crumple. Lily immediately went to him, putting her arm around his shoulders the way Sarah used to do when George had bad days. "Your uncle and this Harrison guy," Marcus said, his voice small. "They were stealing from Mom?" "Yeah, buddy, I think so." "And now Mom's missing because she found out?" George wanted to lie, wanted to protect this kid from the truth. But he'd never lied to Lily about hard things, and he wouldn't lie to Marcus. "I think your mom's disappearance is connected to what she discovered, but that means we know why she was taken, and if we know why, we can figure out where. Can you really find her?" George looked at this 8-year-old boy who'd been brave enough to stand in the snow begging strangers for help when the adults in his life failed him. Thought about Vivian Wilson, who'd built an empire while raising her son alone and still made time for bedtime stories and school plays. Thought about the threat in those emails and what desperate people did when cornered. "I'm going to try everything I can." His phone buzzed. A text from Mike Chen. "Heard you were asking about traffic cams at the Grandview. You working a case?" George had texted Mike on the drive over, a Hail Mary, hoping his former partner would still have his back. He typed back, "Woman missing. Billionaire CEO. Uncovered embezzlement. Now disappeared after fake blind date. I think it's related." Mike's response came fast. "Send me the details. I'll pull footage." George sent everything. Location, time frame, Vivian's photo. Then he turned back to Vivian's computer. If she'd been compiling evidence against Harrison and Richard, she would have backup files. People with that kind of money didn't rely on single copies. He found them in an encrypted cloud folder, hundreds of documents, wire transfers totaling $30 million over 2 years, shell companies in the Cayman Islands, fake vendor contracts. It was a masterclass in corporate theft, and Vivian had documented everything. But more importantly, there were emails between Harrison and Richard planning the whole thing, including one from 2 weeks ago that made George's blood run cold. "She won't stop. She's going to destroy us both. We need a permanent solution." "What kind of permanent solution?" "The kind that makes her disappear. I know people. It can look random. A mugging gone wrong. An accident. She has that blind date next week. That could work." "You're talking about killing my sister." "I'm talking about protecting our future. 20 million each is worth it. Or you can go to prison for embezzlement. Your choice." There was a long gap. Then Richard's response, "Fine, set it up, but I don't want to know the details, and make it look real." George sat back in his chair, feeling sick. This wasn't just embezzlement. This was conspiracy to commit murder, and Vivian had walked right into their trap. His phone buzzed again. Mike, sending video files. George opened them on the large monitor. There. 7:40 p.m. the previous evening. Traffic camera footage from the alley behind the Grandview Hotel. A black SUV with tinted windows parked in the shadows. 2 men in dark clothes standing near the vehicle. At 7:43, a woman in a blue dress appeared at the mouth of the alley. Vivian Wilson. She was looking at her phone, probably texting Bradford that the date was going fine. She didn't see the men until they grabbed her. George watched, his jaw tight, as Vivian fought. She was clearly trying to scream, but one of the men clamped a hand over her mouth. She kicked, struggled, landed at least one good hit before they overpowered her. Then one of them hit her hard across the face and she went limp. They dragged her into the SUV. The vehicle pulled away. The whole abduction took less than 90 seconds. Marcus had turned away, but George knew the boy had seen enough. Lily was holding his hand, whispering something George couldn't hear. Probably the same things she'd whispered to herself when her mom was dying, and the world felt too big and too scary. "Bradford." George's voice was steady despite the rage burning in his chest. "That SUV. I need you to pull every traffic camera between the Grandview and the industrial waterfront. That's where they're taking her." "How do you know?" "Because Harrison has properties there. I found the records in Vivian's files. Shell companies own 3 warehouses in that area." George was already pulling up property records. "Here, Blackstone Holdings, registered to Harrison's law firm. Warehouse on Pier 17. We need to call the police." "And tell them what?" "That we hacked into private emails and illegally accessed traffic cameras. By the time we get a warrant, she could be dead." George stood up. "I'm going to get her. You're going to call Mike Chen at SFPD and tell him everything. Give him the evidence. But I'm not waiting. You can't go alone. If they're willing to kill a CEO, they'll kill you too. I'm not going to let an 8-year-old lose his mother because I was too scared to take a risk." George turned to Lily. "Sweetheart, I need you to stay here with Marcus and Mr. Bradford. Can you do that for me?" Lily's eyes were huge. "Dad, you promised you wouldn't do dangerous stuff anymore." "I know, but sometimes promises have to break so other promises can be kept. Marcus needs his mom, and she needs help. I'm the only one who can get there in time. You're going to be careful?" As careful as I can. Lily hugged him tight. You better come back. I already lost Mom. I'm not losing you too. George held his daughter, breathing in her strawberry shampoo smell, memorizing the feeling of her small arms around his waist. I'll come back. That's a promise I can keep. He looked at Bradford. Call Mike Chen. Tell him everything. And if I'm not back in 2 hours, send the cavalry to Pier 17. Then George Adams, who'd sworn never to run into danger alone again, walked out of that penthouse and headed straight into the worst decision of his life. Or the best one, depending on how the next 2 hours went. The warehouse at Pier 17 was exactly as grim as George expected. A massive industrial building that had once manufactured shipping containers but had been abandoned for 5 years after the company went bankrupt. Broken windows on the upper floors let in snow and wind. Graffiti covered the lower walls, territorial markers from local gangs claiming the space. Rusted equipment sat in frozen puddles. The kind of place where bodies got dumped and nobody asked questions because nobody wanted to know the answers. George parked his car 3 blocks away in the lot of a closed seafood processing plant. The area was deserted. Most of the businesses down here had shuttered years ago when the port moved operations north. Now it was just empty warehouses and the occasional homeless encampment. The perfect place to hide someone you didn't want found. He turned off his phone and left it in the car. If Harrison's people were smart, they might be monitoring Bradford's communications. George couldn't risk them getting a warning that someone was coming. He'd already bent every rule in the investigator handbook tonight. Might as well add breaking and entering to the list. No phone, no backup, no weapon except the small pocket knife he carried. Just 15 years of training, a lot of prayers, and a desperate need to save a woman he'd never met because her 8-year-old son had stood in the snow with tears frozen on his cheeks begging strangers for help. George approached the warehouse on foot, keeping to the shadows cast by other buildings. The snow was falling harder now, covering his tracks almost as fast as he made them. There were lights on in one section of the warehouse, the old administrative offices that jutted out from the main manufacturing floor. A black SUV parked near the loading dock, covered in a light coating of snow. The same vehicle from the traffic camera footage. He circled the building first. Years of tactical training overriding his impatience, counted exits, noted broken windows that could serve as escape routes, looked for signs of other vehicles or people, found nothing except the SUV and the lit windows. George found a service entrance on the east side with a busted lock that looked recent. Someone had pried it open with a crowbar, probably the same people who'd brought Vivian here. He slipped inside, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness. The building smelled like rust and decay and old machine oil. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. His footsteps echoed despite his attempts at silence. George moved slowly through the darkness, navigating around abandoned equipment and debris, following the sound of voices toward the lit section. Should have killed her already. A man's voice. Angry, impatient. This was supposed to look like a random assault gone wrong. We grab her, rough her up, dump the body. Clean and simple. You said you wanted her to suffer first. Another voice. Colder, more calculating. Give her time to think about what happens when people cross me. Besides, her brother wanted time to set up his alibi. He's on a business trip in Tokyo. Perfect cover. George crept closer, found a vantage point behind old machinery where he could see into the lit section. And there she was, Vivian Wilson, bound to a chair in the middle of the concrete floor. Her blue dress was torn. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen shut. Blood had dried on her split lip, but her remaining eye was alert, fierce. Even tied up and beaten, she looked like she was planning her next move. 2 men stood in front of her. One George didn't recognize, probably hired muscle. The other matched the photos from the company files. Robert Harrison, 42 years old, expensive suit. The kind of face that looked trustworthy in board meetings while stabbing you in the back. "I'll ask you one more time, Vivian." Harrison's voice was almost gentle, almost regretful. "Where are the backup files? We found the ones on your computer. We know you had more." Vivian's response was to spit blood at his feet. "Go to hell." Harrison sighed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Sign over your shares of the company. Resign as CEO. I'll make sure Marcus is taken care of. You can disappear quietly, live somewhere remote. Or you can die here, and I'll forge the documents anyway. Either way, I get what I want." "You'll never get away with this. People know about the embezzlement. I sent evidence to your lawyer. We intercepted it. To the FBI. Your meeting was cancelled. Turns out federal investigators don't take appointments from dead women." Harrison pulled out a gun. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign these papers transferring your shares to a trust controlled by your brother. He'll petition the court for guardianship of Marcus. I'll be appointed acting CEO, and you'll have a tragic accident. Fall from your penthouse balcony. The grief-stricken single mother who couldn't handle the pressure anymore." Vivian laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was broken but defiant. "Richard will never get guardianship. I have a will. Marcus goes to my college roommate if anything happens to me. You planned all this and didn't even check basic estate documents?" Harrison's face darkened. "Then we'll contest the will, or have another accident. Your roommate, her family. Whoever stands between me and controlling that company." He pressed the gun to Vivian's temple. "I've already killed for this. What's a few more bodies?" George had heard enough. He stepped out of the shadows, hands raised, no weapon. "How about you start with me?" Both men spun. Harrison kept the gun on Vivian, but his eyes locked on George. "Who the hell are you?" "George Adams, private investigator. And you just confessed to conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, embezzlement, and fraud." George kept his voice calm, measured, the same tone he'd used talking down armed suspects during his detective days. "I've got officers on the way. You kill her now, you've got nothing to negotiate with." It was a bluff. George had no idea if Bradford had called Mike. No idea if anyone was coming. But Harrison hesitated. The hired muscle didn't. He pulled his own gun, aiming at George. "You're alone. No backup. Nobody knows you're here." "Wrong. I told her bodyguard exactly where I was going. I told SFPD. I told her son." George took a step forward. "But here's the thing. You can shoot me. You can kill her. But her son is safe. The evidence is safe. And every second you waste is another second the cops get closer." "He's bluffing," Harrison said. "Kill him." The muscle fired. George dove left. The bullet sparked off metal machinery behind him. Then George was moving, 20 years of hand-to-hand training taking over. He grabbed a piece of broken pipe from the ground and swung hard, connected with the gunman's wrist. Heard bones crack. The gun flew across the floor. George didn't stop. He drove his shoulder into the man's chest, slamming him into the concrete, followed with a brutal elbow to the face. The man went limp. Harrison was raising his gun. George threw the pipe. It hit Harrison's hand, sending his weapon skittering away. Then George rushed forward. They crashed into each other. Harrison was bigger, softer. George was desperate. They hit the ground hard. Harrison got a punch in. George's vision blurred. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not with Vivian watching. Not with Marcus waiting at home. He got Harrison in a chokehold, held on while the man struggled. Held on until Harrison's movement slowed, stopped, went completely limp. George released him, gasping for air. His face was bleeding, his ribs screamed. But he was alive. He stumbled to Vivian, pulling out a pocket knife to cut her bonds. Are you okay?" She was crying, actually crying, tears streaming down her bruised face. "My brother. Robert said my brother planned this. Richard wanted me dead." "I know, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." George freed her hands, moved to her ankles. But we need to leave, now, before they wake up or more people come. Vivian stood on shaky legs. George caught her before she fell. I've got you. Can you walk? I can run if I have to. Her voice was stronger than her body. My son, is Marcus safe? At home with my daughter and your bodyguard. He's the one who led me to you. Wouldn't give up. Wouldn't stop asking for help until someone listened. Vivian's face crumpled. I need to see him. Please. We'll get you to a hospital first. No. Hospital can wait. I need to see my son. George understood that. He helped her toward the exit, supporting most of her weight. They made it through the warehouse, out the service door, into the cold night air. And there, pulling up with lights flashing, were 6 police cruisers. Mike Chen stepped out of the first one, his face a mix of relief and exasperation. You called backup after all, Mike said. Bradford must have called once he realized what I was doing. George helped Vivian toward the cars. 2 men inside, Harrison and hired Muscle, both involved in kidnapping, attempted murder, embezzlement, corporate fraud, and there's evidence of a conspiracy involving Richard Wilson. Mike nodded to the other officers. They moved past, weapons drawn, clearing the building. An ambulance pulled up. Paramedics rushed toward Vivian, but she pushed past them, looking at George with desperate eyes. Marcus, please. I need to see Marcus. George looked at Mike. Can we get her to her son, just for a few minutes? Then hospital, then full statements. Mike hesitated, then nodded. I'll drive, but paramedics follow. And George, we're going to have a very long conversation about your investigative methods. Looking forward to it. They put Vivian in Mike's patrol car. George climbed in back with her. She was shaking, probably from shock and cold and the aftermath of 24 hours of terror. He shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. Thank you, she whispered. You saved my life. Your son saved your life. He wouldn't give up, stood in the snow begging every person who walked by until someone helped. That's all him. He's brave. He gets it from his mom. Vivian looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. You came alone, into a warehouse with armed men. No backup, no plan. That's insane. Yeah. Why would you do that? George thought about Lily losing Sarah, about Marcus crying in the snow, about promises made to children who'd already lost too much. Because someone had to, and I was the only one there. They rode the rest of the way in silence. When they pulled up to Grandview Towers, Marcus was waiting in the lobby with Bradford, Lily, and building security. The boy saw his mother through the car window and ran. Vivian stumbled out of the vehicle, dropped to her knees on the sidewalk. Marcus crashed into her arms, nearly knocking her over. They held each other, both crying, both shaking. You came back, Marcus sobbed. You came back. I promised, baby. I'll always come back. Always. Vivian kissed his hair, his forehead, his tear-stained cheeks. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you were scared. Mr. Adams found you, just like he promised. Vivian looked up at George over Marcus's shoulder. Her face was destroyed, bruised, bloody, swollen. But her eyes were clear, grateful. He's a hero. He's a dad, Lily said, appearing beside George. That's what dads do. George put his arm around his daughter, watched Vivian and Marcus reunite, felt something in his chest that had been frozen for 3 years start to thaw. Mike appeared beside him. The paramedics want to take her to the hospital, check for serious injuries. Give them another minute. They stood there, watching mother and son hold each other like they'd never let go. Finally, Vivian stood, keeping Marcus close. She looked at the paramedics and nodded. Okay, hospital, but Marcus comes with me. And Mr. Adams, Marcus added, and Lily. They have to come too. Vivian smiled through her tears. Yeah, they have to come too. At the hospital, doctors confirmed what George already suspected. Cracked ribs from the beating, concussion, severe bruising, dehydration, but nothing permanently damaging. Nothing that wouldn't heal. While Vivian was being examined, George sat in the waiting room with Lily and Marcus. The kids had found a deck of cards and were playing some complicated game Marcus was making up as he went. Mike appeared with coffee and news. We arrested Harrison and his hired muscle, both talking, trying to flip on each other for reduced sentences. And we've got a warrant out for Richard Wilson. Tokyo police picked him up at his hotel. He's fighting extradition, but he'll lose. Good. The evidence you found in Vivian's office, technically inadmissible since you obtained it illegally, but it gave us probable cause for our own warrant. The legal stuff will stick. How long will they go away for? Between the embezzlement, conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, attempted murder, 25 to life, each. Richard might get a slightly better deal for cooperating, but he's still looking at 20 years minimum. George nodded. Justice. It felt good. It felt right. It felt like something he'd been missing for 3 years. The department wants to talk to you, Mike continued, about coming back. The captain specifically asked. Mike, just think about it. No pressure. But Phil, you're still one of the best investigators I've ever worked with. What happened 3 years ago, that wasn't your fault. It was bad luck and bad timing, but you can't let one mistake define the rest of your life. It's not just one mistake. I put you in danger. I broke protocol. I almost got you killed. And tonight you saved a woman's life by breaking every rule in the book. So maybe the rules aren't always right. Maybe sometimes you have to trust your gut and do what needs to be done. Before George could respond, a nurse appeared. Ms. Wilson is asking for Mr. Adams, room 304. George stood, looked at Lily. You okay here with Marcus? We're fine, Dad. Go talk to her. Room 304 was quiet. Vivian sat propped up in bed, IV in her arm, bandages on her face. She looked exhausted and beaten down and somehow still formidable. Hey, George said awkwardly. How are you feeling? Like I got kidnapped and punched in the face by my business partner. She managed a small smile. But alive. Thanks to you. Thanks to Marcus. Kid wouldn't take no for an answer. He's stubborn, gets it from me. Vivian gestured to the chair beside her bed. Sit, please. I want to talk to you. George sat. If this is about payment, it's not about payment. Though I'm obviously going to pay you, probably more than you've made in your entire career as a security consultant. She paused. I want to hire you, full-time, head of my personal security. Name your price. I appreciate the offer, but I don't do full-time investigative work anymore. I have Lily to think about. Bring her. I'll hire you both. Set your own hours. Work from home when you need to. Whatever it takes. Vivian's voice was intense, desperate even. You saved my life. You risked everything to help my son. I want you in my life. I need people I can trust. And I trust you. There was something in her eyes, something beyond professional gratitude. George recognized it because he felt it too. That pull, that connection. 2 single parents who'd been through hell and survived. Let me think about it, George said. I need to talk to Lily, make sure she's okay with everything. Of course. Vivian reached out, took his hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong, despite everything. But George, thank you. Not just for saving me, for believing Marcus, for caring about a stranger's kid when you had every reason to walk away. Couldn't walk away, not from him. He reminded me too much of Lily. She's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. George squeezed Vivian's hand gently. Get some rest. We can talk details later. Over the next few weeks, as Richard Wilson and Robert Harrison went through the legal system, George found himself spending more and more time at the Wilson penthouse. It started innocently enough. Vivian needed security upgrades after everything that happened, needed someone she could trust to assess vulnerabilities and fix them. Officially as a security consultant, he did full assessments of her building access, replaced all her locks, installed panic buttons in Marcus's room and her bedroom, updated emergency protocols, trained her new security team on proper threat assessment, vetted Bradford's replacement when the guilt-stricken bodyguard resigned. George interviewed 6 candidates before finding someone he trusted, an ex-Secret Service agent named Patricia, who'd protected diplomats and knew how to be professional without being intrusive. Unofficially, George was becoming something else, something that felt dangerously close to a friend, maybe more than a friend. He and Vivian would sit up late after the kids went to bed, ostensibly reviewing security footage or discussing protocol updates. But somehow they always ended up just talking, drinking coffee at her kitchen counter and sharing the things they didn't tell anyone else, about raising kids alone, about the impossible balance between being there for your child and providing for them financially, about how Vivian felt guilty every time she missed bedtime because of a board meeting, about how George still woke up sometimes and reached for Sarah only to remember she was gone, about the weight of running a billion-dollar company while making sure your child felt loved and normal and didn't grow up to be an entitled brat. About how Vivian deliberately kept Marcus's life modest despite their wealth. Public school instead of private academy. Age-appropriate allowance instead of unlimited credit cards. Chores and responsibilities and consequences for bad behavior. About the fear of letting people in when you'd already lost so much, when your heart had already shattered once and you weren't sure you could survive it breaking again, when you'd rebuilt your life around being safe and careful and now someone was making you want to risk everything. Lily and Marcus became inseparable. They'd build elaborate blanket forts in the penthouse living room using every cushion and sheet they could find, would argue passionately about whether superheroes or scientists would win in a fight, with Marcus taking the scientist position because Iron Man is basically a scientist in a suit, checkmate. Would collaborate on homework assignments with the kind of teamwork that made both George and Vivian slightly concerned about their future business partnership potential. Lily taught Marcus about astronomy, showing him how to find constellations through Vivian's massive penthouse windows, explained about black holes and neutron stars with the confidence of someone who'd been reading NASA websites since she was 6. Made him promise to name his first company after a star. Marcus taught Lily about business strategy, drawing organizational charts and explaining market analysis with the casual authority of someone who'd been sitting in on board meetings his whole life. Showed her his mom's presentation decks and translated the corporate speak into kid language. It was adorable and slightly concerning how much corporate jargon an 8-year-old could absorb. Lily had started saying things like synergistic relationship and optimal efficiency, and George didn't know whether to be proud or worried. One Saturday afternoon in late January, George suggested taking both kids to the Science Museum. He'd been planning to take just Lily, but Marcus had mentioned never going, and George couldn't stand the thought of the kid missing out. Vivian asked if she could come too, said it so hesitantly, like she was afraid of intruding, like she didn't realize George thought about her basically every waking moment and several sleeping ones. She showed up wearing jeans and a hoodie instead of her usual designer everything, hair in a simple ponytail, minimal makeup, trying to blend in with the regular parents who took their kids to museums on Saturdays. She looked younger, more relaxed, absolutely beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with expensive clothes or professional styling. They walked through exhibits on space and dinosaurs and human anatomy, watched the kids race through the interactive displays, calling out discoveries and dragging each other to the coolest stuff. Marcus showed Lily the business leadership exhibit. Lily showed Marcus the planetarium. They both lost their minds over the earthquake simulator. "This is dangerous," Vivian said quietly as they stood watching Lily and Marcus argue about black holes. "What is this? Us? Whatever this is becoming. I hire you to protect us, and now we're at museums on Saturdays like we're a family." George knew exactly what she meant. "Yeah. I've never been good at relationships. I work too much. I'm too driven. I chose building a company over building a personal life. That's why I was on a blind date with a fake consultant instead of with someone real. I haven't dated since Sarah died, haven't even thought about it. The idea of Lily getting attached to someone and then losing them again terrifies you." "Yeah." George watched the kids laugh together. "But maybe being terrified is part of living. Maybe staying safe means staying small." Vivian looked at him, really looked at him. "You're not small. You ran into a warehouse with armed men to save a stranger. That was different. That was brave. It was brave. And this," she gestured between them, "is brave too, if we let it be." George's heart was pounding. He'd been carefully not thinking about how Vivian's smile made him feel, how her laugh sounded like coming home, how being around her made him want to be better than the broken ex-detective who'd given up. "I'm scared," he admitted, "of failing, of letting you down, of Lily getting hurt if this doesn't work. I'm scared too, of trusting someone with my heart and my son, of being vulnerable when I've spent years being strong, of what happens if you decide we're too complicated." They stood there in the museum, surrounded by families and children, both terrified and both wanting something more than fear. "Maybe we could try," George said finally, slowly. "See what happens." Vivian smiled. "I'd like that." That night, after they'd dropped Vivian and Marcus at home, Lily asked the question George had been dreading. "Dad, are you dating Vivian? Like for real dating?" George almost lied, almost deflected. But he'd never lied to his daughter about important things. "Maybe. Would that be okay with you?" Lily thought about it seriously, the way she did when considering if vegetables were really necessary. "Is she nice to you?" "Very nice." "Does she make you happy?" "She does." "And Marcus is cool. He taught me about market analysis today." Lily grinned. "So yeah, it's okay. But Dad?" "Yeah, sweetheart. Don't mess it up. I like having a friend my age who actually understands derivatives." George laughed, pulled his daughter into a hug. "I'll do my best." 3 months later, in early April, when the snow had finally melted and the city was coming back to life, George officially moved out of his small apartment and into a house he bought near Lily's school. Nothing fancy, a modest 3-bedroom in a neighborhood with good schools and sidewalks where kids rode bikes. Big enough for him and Lily to each have real bedrooms instead of sharing space. With a guest room for when Marcus stayed over, which was becoming more and more frequent. Vivian helped him move, showed up at 8 a.m. in old jeans and one of George's sweatshirts that she'd somehow acquired over the past few months. Her hair was in a messy bun. She wore sneakers instead of heels, looked more beautiful than any magazine cover or professional headshot. They carried boxes and assembled furniture and argued about where things should go in that comfortable way couples do. Vivian thought the couch should face the window for natural light. George thought it should face the TV for practical viewing angles. They compromised by putting it at an angle that satisfied neither of them, but made them both laugh. She hung curtains while George assembled bookshelves, made sandwiches for lunch using bread and turkey they'd bought at the corner store, sat on the floor of his new living room, eating and planning where pictures should go on the walls. Because they were a couple now, officially. It had happened gradually, And then all at once. George had taken Vivian to dinner 2 weeks earlier at a small Italian place in a neighborhood where nobody recognized her, where she could just be Vivian instead of Vivian Wilson, billionaire CEO. They talked until the restaurant closed and the staff started pointedly stacking chairs, talked about everything they'd been carefully not saying, about how George's heart raced every time she smiled, about how Vivian found excuses to see him almost daily, about how they were both terrified, but maybe that was okay. They'd kissed in his car in the restaurant parking lot like teenagers, soft at first, tentative, then deeper, more certain. George had cupped her face carefully, mindful of the fading scars from her kidnapping. Vivian had grabbed his shirt and pulled him closer like she was afraid he'd disappear. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, Vivian had laughed. "So we're doing this?" "Yeah, I think we are. I'm probably going to mess it up. I work too much. I'm not good at relationships. George had kissed her again. "I'm terrified of losing someone else I love. I have baggage. We're a mess," Vivian finished. "Yeah, but maybe we can be a mess together." They'd decided to make it real. Tell the kids, tell Mike, tell Vivian's assistant and board members and everyone who needed to know that the head of security and the CEO were dating. Let the chips fall where they would. Marcus was thrilled. Lily was pragmatic. "Does this mean we're going to be siblings eventually?" "Maybe," George had said. "Is that okay?" "Only if I get to be the older sister. Marcus needs guidance." Mike Chen came to the housewarming party George threw, brought beer and congratulations and a job offer George still hadn't accepted. "The captain's serious," Mike said as they stood on George's new back deck. "We want you back, full detective. Your pick of divisions. I don't know if I'm ready. You ran into a warehouse alone and took down 2 armed men, saved a billionaire from her own family, solved a $30 million embezzlement case. What part of that says, 'not ready'?" George thought about it. About 3 years of playing it safe. About the moment he'd decided to help Marcus instead of walking away. About realizing that living meant risking. "Let me think about it. I need to talk to Lily and Vivian." "Fair enough." Mike raised his beer. "To second chances. To second chances." 6 months after the warehouse rescue, on a sunny day in August, when the city was hot and bright and full of life, George stood in a courthouse in his best suit, watching Vivian Wilson prepare to become Vivian Wilson Adams. They'd opted for a small ceremony instead of the massive wedding Vivian's board members had suggested. No media, no photographers, no corporate sponsors or networking opportunities. Just the people who actually mattered. Mike Chen was there, looking proud in his dress uniform. Lily wore a purple dress she'd picked out herself and carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Marcus wore a suit that matched George's and kept adjusting his tie nervously. Vivian's college roommate Jennifer flew in from Boston, crying happy tears before the ceremony even started. A handful of close friends. Vivian's assistant Lisa, who'd been mortified about the fake blind date, but had helped compile the evidence that put Richard and Harrison in prison. Patricia, the new head of security, standing discreetly in the back. That was it. 15 people total. Perfect. Vivian wore a simple white dress, not the elaborate designer gown her stylist had suggested. Just a beautiful dress that made her look radiant and happy and exactly like herself. Her hair was down in soft waves, minimal jewelry. The fading scars on her face from the beating barely visible under subtle makeup. She held George's hands while the judge read the ceremony. Her green eyes were bright with tears, happy tears, the kind Sarah used to cry during sappy movies. When the judge said, "You may kiss the bride," George cupped Vivian's face gently, carefully, because she was still self-conscious about the fading scars, even though he'd told her 100 times they didn't matter. Kissed her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning for 3 years. like she was the answer to questions he'd stopped asking, like she was his second chance at happiness, and he was never letting go. The small crowd cheered. Marcus and Lily cheered loudest, jumping up and down and making the kind of scene that would have embarrassed them if they'd been thinking about anything except how happy they were. After the ceremony, after they'd signed the papers and made it legal, Marcus tugged George's sleeve. His face was serious, thoughtful in the way 8-year-olds get when they're trying to navigate complicated emotions. "Does this mean I should call you Dad now?" George knelt to the boy's level, the same level he'd knelt to 6 months ago in the snow outside a police station when a terrified kid with tears on his cheeks had asked for help finding his missing mother. When George had made a promise that changed everything. "Only if you want to. You can call me George if that's easier, or Mr. Adams, or hey you. Whatever feels right." Marcus bit his lip. "I want to call you Dad, but I also want to remember my biological father, even though he left. Is that okay? Can I have 2 dads? One I don't remember and one who's here?" George's throat tightened. He thought about Sarah, about how Lily still talked about her mother, even though the memories were fading, about how love wasn't a finite resource you rationed out carefully. "It's more than okay. Love doesn't divide, Marcus. It multiplies. You can have 2 dads, one who you'll always carry with you, even if you don't remember him, and one who's here now and isn't going anywhere. Having both doesn't make either of them less real." Marcus hugged him tight. Lily joined in. Then Vivian wrapped her arms around all of them, and George thought about the man he used to be. The detective who'd run into danger without backup and paid the price. The father who'd nearly let fear keep him from living. The broken man who'd convinced himself safe meant alone. He wasn't that man anymore. He was better, because he'd taken the risk, because he'd listened to a scared kid in the snow, because he'd let himself love again. A year later, George sat in his new office at SFPD. He'd taken the job with Vivian's encouragement, reviewing case files. He'd rejoined major crimes, was teaching rookie detectives proper investigation techniques, had closed 4 cases in 6 months. Mike Chen poked his head in. "Captain wants to see you." George followed him to the captain's office, expecting another commendation. Instead, there was a young woman with tears in her eyes. "Detective Adams, this is Sarah Martinez. Her sister disappeared 3 days ago after a work conference. Nobody's helping her. They say adults are allowed to be missing for 48 hours. George's stomach clenched. He knew this story, had lived this story. "Tell me everything," he said, sitting down. "Every detail." And as Sarah Martinez poured out her desperate story, George thought about Marcus in the snow, about believing when nobody else would, about second chances and living brave. "I'm going to help you," he told Sarah. "That's a promise." Because sometimes the best things in life started with the worst situations. A child alone in the snow, a woman kidnapped by family, a disgraced detective given one more chance to do the right thing, all of it leading to this moment, to this life, to this family. "Sir, my mommy disappeared after her blind date." Those words had changed everything, and George would be forever grateful that he'd stopped, that he'd listened, that he'd cared, because in saving Vivian Wilson, he'd saved himself too, and that made all the risk, all the danger, all the fear worth it, every single second.